Welcome to another Speaking of Steel podcast. We're just back from the UK Metals Expo, where we had conversations with various visitors. Here's what they had to say.
It's been quite a challenging year. The volumes are down, the price of steel has dropped.
The big issues out there are things like CBAM issue and also quite a lot of staff and staff retention problems as well.
I think sentiment is good considering the market and how poor the demand is.
We're really lucky as a business because we feed into so many different markets. So if construction is slow, then architectural design might be busy. If automotive is slow, then nuclear might be busy. But overall, you're right, it's been a difficult 18 months.
A lot of our members obviously are concerned big time for this HRC quota.
We're somewhat dependent, like a lot of people, around oil and gas, and where that's heading medium term is almost impossible to read.
The feeling at the moment is that the market is low, but there seems to be a little bit more positivity in there.
Coming from a low base, you can say it's not going to get any worse, but no, actually I think should be a bit more positive than that.
I think people have a good outlook for 2025 in terms of improvement, in terms of government spending, infrastructure projects in the public sector, the private sector.
There's cause for optimism in other market segments, renewables, naval and defence, desalination, water treatment, are really strong market segments. So I'm going to be trying to talk it up, I think, rather than talk it down, yeah.
We're seeing more inquiries. Companies that are in the freight business are seeing good business. Our insurers, like credit insurers, everybody seems to be quite positive. So I'm hoping these are all signs for a better 2025.
I mean, we are in a cyclical industry, so we're at the bottom. It can only go up.
Talking together, working together, we can look at ways that we can make it better for everybody.
Guys, you were all there. You were on the stand. Great to have you back on the Speaking of Steel podcast today. Adam, it's your first time joining us on the podcast. What was it? What was the feedback that you got from people during the event?
I think overall it was quite positive. I think everyone commented on how tough 2024 had been, really, and how tough it will continue to be towards the end of the year. I think the overall is positivity for next year, although sort of subdued. You know, not everyone's really happy with where it'll be.
Yeah, I think just listening to those videos there, though, people clearly felt very optimistic just getting in the room together and having conversations about the market. Do you think, these events sort of foster a bit of positivity in themselves?
Yeah, I think they can do. I think people get together, and like you said, sometimes that's as good as anything, just meeting up with old faces, old friends, and actually maybe realising things aren't as bad as you might be when you're sat in your office on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, welcome back. You were there on the stand as well, making some real useful contacts and also getting that feedback sort of face to face, which is really useful. What were people saying to you? Because there was an air of optimism, but then people were fairly pragmatic at the same time.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting fair and exhibition. I think you sort of sensed that people have had to contend with challenging trading conditions for much of the year. I think there's a realisation that Q4 is going to be equally difficult, and there's going to be some have labelled maybe bury down the hatches, a fight for survival, maybe a sort of symptom of the comments we were receiving. But like Adam mentioned, there's certainly maybe hope on the horizon. People do have cause for optimism. I think that's twofold. Firstly, from the political side of things, I think when the election date was up in the air, I think people were wanting that little bit of certainty of the election. And certainly since the outcome, there's certainly been a lot of talk from the current administration about an industrial strategy, steel being at the heart and core of that, which has whetted the appetite of a lot of steel participants. And certainly the new focus on renewable energies, solar, offshore, onshore developments is something that people are excited about, and certainly hopeful that will come to fruition, if not next year, then in the years to come.
Yeah, Chris has touched on it there, John. I know you were in some of the presentations and seminars that I sat in on, really interesting stuff. But clearly reflecting on the fact that we've got a new government in the UK now, and there's an expectation that there'll be a new economic plan, perhaps a new approach to renewables and things.
I think that is a lot of reason for a lot of the optimism. There's been this period of the past 12, 24 months where the market's been very quiet. We've also had sort of issues, like you say, politically. There is sort of a lack of direction, whereas the new government that's come in, they've come out sort of quite strongly, suggesting that they're going to support the UK industry.
Yeah, in particular, what specifics have been sort of spoken about so far?
So I suppose the big story at the Expo was the funding that Tata received to help decarbonise the Port Talbot plant. There was £500 million that the UK government put in to help that, and then I think there's another sort of $2 billion on top of that they've got earmarked for the decarbonisation of the UK industry. So while we've not heard anything, perhaps at British Steel just yet, there is sort of reason to suggest that there may be an announcement soon.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that Tata transition, because we have got an interview with Tata UK's CEO Rajesh Nair, and we'll show that in a moment, just to frame a bit of a discussion about that. But we'll keep on track with the market sort of sentiment at the moment. And Adam, I mean, you're conducting regular research calls for MEPS, clearly away from the UK Metals Expo. How's the market evolving now? Is it subdued? We've seen that subdued market. Is it going to carry on that way, do you think?
It feels like it. I think there's probably pockets where things are better than others. So, more niche, high value steels are probably performing better than your general construction, just because of the current economic picture we've seen everywhere, really, not just in the UK but in Europe. So I think that's probably going to continue till at least the spring next year. I think there's optimism with the UK government that interest rates will be reduced, and it'll sort of bring some infrastructure spending and some relief to that. But I think on the continent, in Germany especially, it's not going to be as quickly as that to improve, really.
Yeah, because we saw that recent cut in the US to their interest rate, half a percentage point. I mean, I guess people be hoping that the UK will follow suit.
Yeah, and I think that's people's sort of expectation as well. So I guess it's just a bit of a wait and see whether that will happen or not, I suppose.
Absolutely. And back to you, Chris. What are people's expectations? That you're speaking to. I think you've already mentioned outlook for the rest of the year is fairly subdued, but where are things headed?
Yeah, and I think you touched on it there. I think the financial constraints that a lot of companies are facing at the moment, the relatively high cost of finance. I think they've been slightly encouraged by the interest rate cut by the Bank of England in August. I know rates held in September, but there's expectation of a further cut towards the end of the year. And I think while people are slightly concerned about the cautious nature of the fall of the rates by the authorities, I think a lot of companies can take heart from the fact that they can budget accordingly for certain projects, that they can almost budget for a worst case scenario financially, in the expectations that it's a matter of when, not if, rates will come down. So certainly in terms of public and private spending and expenditure, certainly people can take a lot of confidence and heart from the fact that it will go ahead, and a lot of projects will start to be given the green light now.
In terms of supply, I mean, clearly we've seen demand has been quite low. What's the scenario for supply in the UK? Is it the same oversupply situation we've seen elsewhere because there's just not enough consumption?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of parallels with the UK and the rest of the world. I think in terms of supply, the UK steel industry was very much at one time in the hands of one or two players. The production base is very much fragmented now in the hands of quite a few players, and it is arguable, obviously, with the transition that we touched on there from blast furnace production to electric arc production. There's obviously a lot of question marks about the long-term future of the site. But on one hand, a lot of companies are certainly operating maybe at minimum production levels, maybe concentrating on ad hoc, high-value orders, maybe producing below their capabilities at the moment. And we're certainly seeing a lot of the UK supply maybe align itself to current market demands. But certainly that's a trend we're seeing in the UK, but it's not uncommon for what we're seeing in Europe and potentially what we'll see in other parts of the world as well.
I think clearly what we've seen and what we heard so much about, as you pointed out, John, at the UK Metals Expo, was UK transition to electric arc furnace production, which is going to be ongoing at Tata Steel's Port Talbot plant. So they announced, or it was announced rather, by the UK government that they were going to be securing £500 million worth of funding for that transition.
Yeah, that's it. And in addition to that, there was, I think the total package was 1.25 billion. So that includes the money that Tata were putting towards that as well. Just going back, I think, sort of to the economic side of things, though, one thing that as well as the sort of the conversations we have with people all through the industry, we track a whole range of different data points. And I think what we've seen recently is that the UK seems to be coming out a little bit stronger than a lot of mainland Europe. I mean, the one you obviously always compare it to is Germany and France. And when we're looking at sort of PMIs for construction and
Manufacturing.
Manufacturing, thank you, and those kind of things, we see that's sort of slightly above that 50 mark, whereas for a lot of the European countries, they're struggling to get back up there. So there is sort of a reason for sort of optimism, but one thing that I sort of tend to worry about is that this inflation. Every time I read about it in the UK, they're suggesting that it's going to be a bit stickier. It's a phrase they always use, than in Europe, which means that interest rates could potentially, especially as they're being set by the Bank of England rather than the ECB, that they could stay a little bit higher for longer.
Yeah, and I think we're certainly seeing that, like John mentioned there, the high services inflation, maybe the new potential for wage growth from the new public sector pay agreements. So there's certainly a feeling that maybe there will be a need to keep inflationary pressures under control. And like John mentioned, that it's a case, like I said, a case of when rates will fall rather than if. But maybe in light of steel participants, there may be a little bit concerned that the pace of the scale of the fall will be slower than what they want or maybe desire at this stage.
Well, one man who certainly was optimistic about the future when I spoke to him at the UK Metals Expo was Rajesh Nair at Tata Steel UK. So let's just quickly see what he had to say about their transition to AF production. Rajesh, thanks for joining us for a little conversation today. A momentous day for Tata Steel. How does it feel to be here at the UK Metals Expo on such a landmark occasion?
Well, it's really nice because it's kind of you have a kind of a deja vu, because the last year I was here, this announcement that we have finally had this afternoon is almost a year down the line, practically exactly to the day when compared to the previous year. It was at the Steel Expo, 2 days after the Steel Expo, we made our announcement of our future plans. And it's at this Steel Expo we finally concluded the agreement with the government. So it's a nice thing. Maybe the Steel Expo is a fortuitous thing for the company and for all of us. So yeah, but as you said, it's a momentous day for us because it's the single largest investment the steel industry has seen in decades, and hopefully one that will help progress the industry in the future.
Okay, so really positive stuff from Tata Steel UK, as you can imagine, after having secured that funding from the new government. John, I mean, in the news in recent months, this plan's been ongoing for some time. There's been talk about the impact on the workforce and, the town of Port Talbot. Is that a significant part of their thinking, do you think? How much are they having to account for that in their plans?
I mean, of course, you've got to have sympathy for the people that are working there and the people that have potentially lost their jobs. But really, this kind of thing is inevitable with the changes that Tata have said are necessary. Electric arc furnaces and moving to the use of those naturally uses a lot less manpower in the day-to-day operations. So as soon as they'd made that decision, it really was sort of inevitable.
So I think we've already seen both blast furnaces taken offline at Port Talbot. So now we're at a point where there's a huge amount of supply and capacity taken out of the UK steel sector. How's that going to affect prices, and I guess how easily people access material in the UK?
Well, I mean, this was one of the things that we were asked on the stand at the expo. People naturally wanted to find our opinion on this, and I think one of the main issues really was that uncertainty. With the quotas set where they were, really there was going to be this massive shortfall in material. What we've just heard though in the past couple of days is that there's been changes to the way those quotas are set. There's been new categories introduced for the hot rolled coil imports. The idea being that there's now going to be split into material that's for consumption, essentially at Tata, and then there's going to be a separate quota for downstream operations.
So what's the volume now? How's that altered the import market in the UK?
So they originally had they called it Category 1, essentially sort of hot rolled coil and sheets, and that was an annual quota of around 1 million tons. So that's essentially been replicated in this new Category 1A. That's pretty much exactly the same. Whereas this new Category 1B, which is designed pretty much to make up for the shortfall from the material that's produced at Port Talbot, the kind of stuff that people will be now having to rely on imports for, that's been set at 2.3 million tons per year. So still slightly less, I think, than what the blast furnaces were able to produce when they were operating sort of at full capacity, but should be enough, or at least that's the intention, for people to rely on for the next couple of years. Those quotas, they go on until June 26.
Recently extended by 2 years, weren't they?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so we've got seven quarters of material available.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Chris, I mean, I know you're very mindful of how much your contacts value the fact that there is a strong domestic steel production facility in the UK. We know there are other UK steelmakers already using EAFs, but I guess a lot of people will be quite anxious to see this now happen and that transition come to fruition quickly.
Yeah, I think they are. I think one of the clear overriding comments that we heard at the expo was the value that UK participants attached to a local domestic supplier. I think apart from the tactical strategic nature of the steel business, UK steel buyers do value that commercial technical liaison that they will get from a local domestic supplier. They'll also have the opportunity to maybe call off material, maybe have greater access to sizes and dimensions that they want, certainly with a quicker lead time than what they can source from overseas. And what was mentioned earlier in terms of imported material, certainly there's a lot of talk at the moment with regards to CBAM. Obviously the transport issues that was happening in the Red Sea and elsewhere in the world. There are quota safeguard implications as well. So imported material does come with maybe a lot of administration, potentially a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, and certainly that's put the focus again on local domestic supply and how key that is to any long-lasting and sustainable business, certainly in manufacturing, but also in steel as well.
Yeah, we saw that, didn't we, when the sort of Russia-Ukraine war sort of came into effect, that the supply chains quickly fell away, and having that local supply, I guess, becomes more important in an unforeseen circumstance. So, we never know what's going to happen. So I guess it's important to have that sort of domestic supply.
And one of the things that you tend to see quite a lot in sort of the wider sort of reporting, sort of beyond the sort of the steel industry, is the worries about not being able to produce virgin steel, not being able to produce steel in a blast furnace anymore. And a lot of the comments that you see relate to not being able to produce all of the grades that you potentially could have done before. Now, there was a couple of really good talks actually at the expo where they were specifically trying to sort of tackle that head on, and there were quite a few comments from the panelists there that were suggesting that with the technology as it is now, there isn't necessarily that need to worry about being able to produce all these grades. Certainly from a technical point of view, it's possible. It's all really down to whether it's sort of commercially viable. But there's nothing sort of within the technology now, is what they were telling us, that'll stop these grades being made.
Yeah, and I think, particularly in the MEPS, one of the MEPS panel debates on carbon steel, which we can still view on demand, thankfully, there was a good conversation about the fact that there is still 2 years to go until it's 2027. I think late 2027 that EAF will come online. So there's time to develop those grades as well between now and then. So I guess we'll still see a lot more availability when that time comes.
Yeah, and I think another point that was made was that because a lot of the steel that would form the scrap has been produced sort of by blast furnace means before. It means there is less impurities in the steel at the moment. So they're really working from sort of a better baseline. One of the issues they have in the USA, where there's quite a lot of electric arc furnaces, I think it's about 70% or so, the steel that's made there is electric arc. They have issues with this sort of repetitive recycle, introduce more and more sort of contaminants, and it makes it more difficult to make these grades that are sort of that are in demand. Whereas we're really sort of coming from a much lower base level, so they all seem quite optimistic that this will be successful.
And it'd be interesting repercussions, like John mentioned there. Obviously, we've talked about the impact on finished steel, but obviously on raw materials as well. The UK is traditionally a net exporter of scrap, so a lot of scrap will go maybe India to other parts of the world. But certainly, when the EF use does ramp up, then certainly there'll be more of a domestic need for scrap. So the scrap is there, but obviously the nature and the destination of that scrap will change over time.
And even more so in the future if British Steel follows suit as well,
Yeah.
Even more so.
There was mention, of course, of the creation of a circular economy in the UK, which I guess feeds into that availability of scrap. Is that something we're likely to see, Chris?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. One of the talking points again, I guess it's something we see more commonly with the US, but a made in America principle. I think there was a lot of talk at the expo about a made in Britain expo, that maybe we need to a lot of projects, particularly not just public projects but private ones, look at domestic sources of supply, not just for the steel but other components as well. One of the issues that was mentioned was a lack of fabrication fabricators in the UK. So there can be a lot of moves made there, but maybe there's certainly the UK needs to catch up in certain quarters to be in that position where it's ready to take advantage of that. But certainly there's certainly a call for a lot of projects to be made domestically or tailored domestically, and certainly that. Maybe the public and the private sector have got a role to play in that to ensure that does happen.
I know, Adam, when we had the panel for MEPS at UK Metals Expo, there was excitement amongst the delegate from Tata that they were going to be able to produce green steel in the UK at much higher volumes than had previously been seen. Is the message you're getting from your contacts that there is going to be a demand for that lower emissions steel?
Yeah, I think going forward there will be. I'm not sure it is sort of right now, just because of the subdued market. I think people are probably not perhaps willing to pay that premium it attracts. But definitely, I think as it becomes more of a conscious decision by big OEMs to reduce emissions and be seen to be greener, then yeah, definitely it will be written into contracts and specifications that they need to see the evidence of it being green steel.
Okay.
And I think there's a feeling as well that a lot of this will be customer driven as well. I think a lot of projects, I know it was mentioned at the expo on one or two occasions about maybe high-rise residential buildings in London, that there's a certain percentage of steel that they want, or as minimum requirement that has to be from low emitted green steel. So I guess there's going to be a bit of a driver from the customer to maybe develop that, and I'm sure once that is in place, there'll be more an appetite for green steel than possibly what there is now.
Absolutely. Well, Tata are clearly making big plans and hopefully, have a positive future outlook. I mean, just going from the comments that you had from people at UK Metals Expo that visited the stand that you spoke to, and I guess your calls since. Can we perhaps reflect on what 2025 might bring? I mean, John, I'll come to you first, just quickly. You know, what do you think the year looks like in the UK sector?
I think optimism, but cautious optimism. I think the optimism because can it get any worse? I think was sort of the feeling really. But it was, like I say, it was great to see everybody together, and there was really sort of that feeling that sort of things might have turned.
Chris?
No, I think again, just touching on the expo, I think it was a great forum. It got all the key stakeholders together. I think it's almost unique in its nature in the UK, and I think people were buoyed that in its still its fledgling years that it's grown and it's gathered a little bit of momentum, and it's a forum that a lot of people involved in steel and the metals industry in general can get together. In terms of the future forecast, I think people, like I said, are maybe suggesting that Q4, maybe Q1 next year is going to be, again, a tough, difficult trading environment, maybe damage limitation in some ways, but certainly beyond that, given a reduction in the political and economic uncertainties we faced, and there are little shoots of recovery that will give people cause for optimism in that time frame and beyond. Great
stuff. And Adam, I think you'd already mentioned that people were now looking for some light at the end of the tunnel in 2025. Will they get that?
Yeah, I think most people seem to think that 2025 will be better than this year. Probably not by much. You know, it might be very similar, but by no means worse, because I think, like John said, can really things get any worse? And I think most people are hoping and praying that it doesn't.
Well, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Let's hope things pan out a lot more positively in 2025. Thanks for joining us, guys. Another Speaking of Steel podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.